Thank you very much. Indeed, the world does not need our permission to change. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. Well, the world doesn't need your permission. So, when I flew in with Kenya Airways, and I got to the immigration, and second time since the visa, Kenyans used to apply for visas when we come to South Africa. So then when you get there, you go to the fast track, and I'm like, wow, it feels so good. Then I get to the immigrations officer, and he asks me, you here for how long? Then I say, just 2 days. Then he looks at me and goes like, you mean you guys used to take 10 days to apply for a visa to come to South Africa just for 2 days? That's the reality, opening up the borders and making it simple for us. Really excited to be here. Now, I'll ask a question. And this is, on the screen you can see blacklist, gray lists, and white list. When I was coming, I decided to read some magazine, Financial Times, and just Googled. I'm saying I'm going to speak, but I need to get some more information. What is current in South Africa? Then this popped up. And the 2 biggest economies in Africa fall under that list. You know which economies are those countries? Sorry? Nigeria and South Africa. But interesting is Mozambique was also there. But when you read the headlines, they just talked about the 2 biggest economies in the world being put on the gray list. And it kept me wondering, why? And there are some that are also coming out of the gray list at the same time, the likes of Morocco. Money laundering, fraud, etc., right? So, the anatomy of the new fraudster. It's an interesting topic, I must say. When you think of fraud, it is something we've lived it for the longest time immemorial. Time immemorial. But when I listened to the previous speakers when they were talking, and I know when Shadrach opened up, and he said Africa will rise when leaders rise, which is very true. We have the leaders here. Bradwin went ahead and said 2.7 billion still not connected in the world. Very huge gap. And then Chan talked about how the mobile will continue to revolutionize how we transact. Now, we always talk about KYC, which is know your customer, right? We talk about it every other day. Every day, know your customer, know your customer. But you see what happens is, I started my career in Kenya with Absa Bank. They took my details. Then I moved to Spain. Then I moved to the UK. Then I moved to Dubai, then back to Kenya. Do they really know me? They got some data, yes, but they always say, know your customer. So what would happen? Once upon a time, the bank will sit back and call you and say, we want to refresh your details. But that died at some point. Now, there's a new tagline, right? Which is know your enemy. So we need to move away from knowing our customers. I'm assuming you already know them. If you don't, then you know what to do. To know your enemy, because if you don't know your customer, that same customer becomes your enemy, depending on how they come into your ecosystem, depending on how you onboard them. I like always saying that fraud has a face. As much as we say fraud doesn't have a face, it does have a face, because there's somebody somewhere who's doing something for that fraud to happen. Now, if you get to know your enemy, then how do you get to know your enemy? Because we are seated here today, and Mohammed and team have done an amazing job to bring all of us here. But do you know what fraudsters do? Is they also enroll for these things. So can you just confirm your neighbor is not one of them? Shadrach. Fraud has a face, guys. It does have a face. And every time we come for these sessions, they also want to understand when Chan is presenting, what is this thing Chan is saying? And how can I stay ahead? When Bradwin is saying these nice numbers, oh, okay, 2.7 billion, they also see the opportunity gap. They're here with us, guys. But the one thing I want you to live with today is one very simple quote. Where there is money, there'll always be fraud. It's basic. So you don't need to put your hands up, but we've stolen at some point, right? Okay, I'll rephrase. We've picked something to keep it safe for somebody at some point. Right? So look at your childhood. Take steps back and ask yourself, what was that thing that you picked to keep it safe for your friends? Just think about it. Theft. You can hear people laughing, right? I'll not mention names. When you think of fraud, where there is money, there's always fraud. Be it in the house, be it at the bank, be it digital, anywhere, there'll always be fraud. So sometimes, when we go back and we start, maybe talking big words, how we can mitigate fraud, we already know how fraud happens. We have the basic understanding. So I really need you to have this with you as you progress. But I want to take you a bit back to history so that you understand fraud is not something that just started the other day, right? Historically, you remember those traveler's checks, the papers? If you sit badly, then Frank would pick it. I change a few things, go to the bank, cash it out, I'm done, right? Do you remember the zip zap? Well, I hope it will not say how old I am, but if you remember the zip zap, when you get your card, you go to a merchant and they put it and they run it, zzz, right? And still those days, there was fraud. You remember mag-stripe cards? Regulators have to come and tell us we need to migrate to chip and pin, contactless, etc. This is a day when fraud started. It's always been here with us, right? So, but the three things that today, in the era that we live in, is the fact that everybody is rushing to do something. And our present reality is we all want to bridge real life to digital. That's what all of us want to do, right? And the other thing is we want to grow and adapt electronic payments. And the last one is speed of transaction processing. All of us want that. But the interesting part here is, do we know our third party's capabilities, the ones we bring on board? Do we go back to vet and understand how have they been performing? Do we do references? How do we do the references? And I say this because if you think of your CV when people are applying for jobs, what happens is, do you trust those references they give down there? Frank Molla, reference number 1, Shadrach, reference number 2, Bradwin. I want you to call those guys. Most of us go ahead and call and say, yes, your referees gave some very good referrals. I've already told Shadrach, boss, you remember that story I did? Please, don't mention it. Just good vibe. And that's how we do it today. But ideally, references sometimes is where, if you know the organization, just write to the HR. They'll give you feedback. It's as simple as that. Let people send you CVs or resumes without references. If the organizations are known, guys, just do it. Some people use third parties to do for them references, which is fine, but you just need to make sure that you do it yourself. So these are present realities where all of us want to be, and that's as I said. But now, if you look at today and the future, something that is really happening, which is social engineering. There's something we call romance fraud for the ladies in the house. Could I have the password? Romance fraud is simply somebody very close to you. They keep on telling you all these sweet nothings, and before you realize it, you're being hit. You can't tell your friends about it because they warned you, but you never listened. And the big reality, cyber attacks, these ones will continue to be there. And of course, AI, that also Chan has talked about. This is our today and our future. If you think of fraud, this is a direction fraud is moving towards. That's a reality. Now, I'm just going to pick the top challenges posing the greatest threat today. Money mules. Very simple. Shadrach, my friend here, has some cash he's gotten from he knows where, but he wants to clean the money. So he gives me the cash, I pass it through my account, it goes through another account. By the time it comes out, it's been sanitized. So fraud is now happening. That's money laundering, how we are channeling our cash. Money mules is one of the biggest things that is happening today. How money is moving. Sent from one person to the other person. You can send 10,000, they break it into 2, 3, 4,000, etc., and it keeps moving. The other one is cross-border fraud, 62%. Again, this is online, digital, web, internet, you name it, mobile. This is happening every other day. But I'll tell you something, guys. When the best time to fix a leaking roof is when the sun is high up, not when it's raining. And most of us, we only think of fraud once we've been hit. The moment you hear Bank X has been hit by fraud, your house is still shining. Maybe the house is raining, but it's a time for you to start fixing yours before it gets to you, because it's gonna get to you sooner or later. So but a lot of us wait for that time once we are hit is when CEOs, board members start prioritizing fraud. We have to do this, guys. Why were we hit? Always try to fix your roof when the sun is high up. When it starts drizzling or raining, it's too late. It's interesting to know that more than 90% of African businesses are operating without the necessary cybersecurity protocols in place. And this is true. Why? We don't know. Why? It's not a priority. Why? Competing priorities at the board level. We want numbers. Why did we fall? We want to grow numbers, but you're not seeing the risk of growing that numbers at the expense of protecting it. But at the same time, this is an interesting one, guys. 51% use the same password for multiple accounts. Again, you don't need to put your hands up. A lot of us, our birthdays, 1980 is your PIN, 1929 is your PIN, or you reverse it, 1819, your date of birth, your month of birth, your anniversaries, when your children were born. I can see people shaking their heads, like, wow, he's already gotten my password. I don't know where you're born. But those same passwords, we end up reusing them on our mobile phones, accessing our internet, accessing our work laptops, every other channel. We just keep on changing the numbers, the exclamation, and we keep on going. Sometimes even your computer now tells you, no, you can't use this again. You've used this enough times. But you're surprised that we still keep on doing it because we're looking at easy ways, but that's a risk. It's a risk for fraud. How many of us, when you go to the internet, we leave a lot of trails for these fraudsters? I go to Facebook, my location, check, I'm landed in South Africa, boom, location picked, Frank Molla, my name is there. Okay, I go to Instagram, they want me to put my date of birth, boom, I'll put it there. Go to Twitter, they also want something else. So what do these guys do? They go to Facebook, they pick your name, they go to this other website, they pick your address, they go to this other website, they pick your Gmail or your email address. If they get access to your card, they have all your information. So online, cyber is easy to happen. So be careful some sites that you visit. Again, this was just an overview of during COVID, where 90% was on lockdown. We lost 50 million jobs. And we also had close to 4K cyber threats a day. On that 50 million jobs, guys, and as far as not long ago where you had the big techs releasing guys, 20,000, 40,000 people, they have to feed other guys. If you don't have a job, you have techie guys out there. Fraud is imminent. It's within reach. We have a lot of people at tech savvy who are out here, but what are some of the loopholes? Our customers, I talked about know your customer. It's very important. But I want to focus on employee a bit here. Once you bring somebody on board, because guys, fraud is as basic as it sounds. The way you onboard is very important as HR, number one. I've seen companies who use referrals. Refer and we pay you a certain amount. That's, I mean, if something happens, we know how to get this person. The way you onboard is important. The way you remunerate is important. A cashier, depending on how much you're paying this guy and he's transacting millions exchange, what are some of the benefits you're giving to these people? How do you vet people who come into your system? Because fraud always is an in-house, it's an internal thing. 90%. Fraud starts within before it goes outside. And it's because of a lot of things that happen inside. You need to start vetting your staff, how they come, how you do your references, back check, how they're treated internally, how you remunerate. It's a whole chain that you need to look at. So the employee factor is very important. It's a very big loophole, and of course, no fraud solutions. That one you've already known. We wait when we are being rained on. That's when we think of setting up fraud. Now, these are just new threats and emerging every day. When Bradwin and Chan on stage, you know, as a comedian sometimes, when you're going on stage after another comedian, and they've said your joke, sometimes you wonder what to say next, all right? So they did a good presentation and touched on some good numbers. So this just gives you an overview of some of the emerging trends every day. You know, 300 billion passwords in use by 2020. What's the population of the world? 1.7? 7 billion? 8? But how many passwords in use? 300 billion, right? 6 trillion cybercrime damage annually by 2021. These are real numbers. These are real statistics, guys. These are just some of the excerpts from the dailies that you pick, where you find banks are targeted, but you realize employees play a very critical role. But one thing you also need to pick is, when you open an account, between 1 day to 45 days, those are the guys where fraud tends to happen a lot. 1 day to 45 days. That's where you get people fraud. And it's targeting more the younger people in new accounts. Fraud landscape in Africa, more or less the same thing. Again, 117,000 using mobile money transfer every month in Malawi. Banking financial institutions struggling to deal with the increase in fraud incidents. And all these guys, like I said, once we tackle the issue of how we onboard, once we tackle the fact that we already know what fraud is, because once upon a time in our lives, we've picked something that is not ours. So we know how this behavior moves up, right? And then there's something interesting about this photo. Again, to the ladies in the room. I know some people looking, I'm like, wow, he looks good, looks handsome, and cool guy. Same photo used to create 16 different accounts within the same bank. Why? Walks in, smiles, distraction. The new face of fraud, right? No. 60,000 contact phone numbers referencing immigration agents. Now you start getting wrong information. You took the person's photo. He came in with a photo, used that photo. 5,000 contact number referencing casinos. 1,500 numbers referencing a meat processing plant. So when you try to call back, it goes to a meat processing plant. It's not the guy who walked in. 2,500 phone numbers referencing the bank branch at which the application was made. Same telephone number used to create 1,000 accounts. It's a true story. It's an Asian bank. I just want to mention the name. This is what the bank discovered after implementing fraud and identity solution. You have them. I see what banks sometimes do today is, don't bring your photo, we'll take your photo. It's a mechanism. These are real case scenario that's happened in an Asia bank. That same photo has been used severally across. But until they installed the fraud and identity solution, they were able to get that. Now, some of the mitigants, guys, I talked about employee education, which is a human firewall, very important. Employee compensation, SIM swap, we know this all, and data protection. These are things we need to take seriously every other day. When you think of fraud, is where money is. That's the basic thing. It's a bit of an old report here, where, gross fraud losses in South Africa, close to R1 billion. That was in 2019. Nigeria at the same time, they equally, were faced with the same, close to 5 billion. And these numbers will always vary and they'll always be there every other day. What is the impact? Distrust in the payment system, derails financial inclusion agenda, reputational risk, etc. But there are solutions. Very simple solution. What you need to do is think of online fraud prevention as risk scoring, omnichannel fraud management, advanced analytics, case management. This is just an overview of what you need to look at. I'll skip on the questions. As BPC, these are the customers. We've had 157 customers in 76 countries, leveraging our fraud solution. It's across central banks, financial institutions, telcos, in all over. These are some of the case studies. FBN in Nigeria, First Bank, Nigeria. The pain point was normally channel and customer-centric view across digital channels. We were able to implement. Qatar, QNB in Egypt. We also did the same thing for them around fraud. The pain points are there. Online monitoring for card transactions. Payment Sense in the UK, one of the biggest processors there. They had to find balance between security and customer experience. DSK Bank in Bulgaria, the list goes on. So, as I close my presentation, ladies and gentlemen, our latest guide on anatomy of the new fraudster, think of cybercrime, social engineering, that's the future of fraud. So with you having this, you just need to think, what do I need to do to mitigate that? Since we might not have any time for questions, we can connect on LinkedIn. Shadrach, thank you very much for having me. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, thank you very much. And just remember that everywhere there's money, everywhere there's money. Thank you.